time we saw John, he was tagging along with his brother, co-hosting one of the most fun events we've ever been a part of. Tonight, John is joined by the incredible Clint Smith III. John will introduce him further, but if you have any awareness of Clint's writing and work, you know that he's a phenomenal speaker and thinker. In all seriousness, the fact is that if somebody can be cogent and nuanced on Twitter, you know their writing is exceptional, and all of Clint's work bears that out. So it's just wonderful to have him here. Clint, thank you so much. Now, John Green, I am sure all of you know, but let's look at just a few of the facts. John is the award-winning, #1 best-selling author of books, including Looking for Alaska, The Fault in Our Stars, and Turtles All the Way Down. His books have received many accolades, including a Prince Medal, a Prince Honor, and an Edgar Award. John has twice been a finalist for the LA Times Book Prize and was selected by Time Magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. He is also the writer and host of the critically acclaimed podcast, The Anthropocene Reviewed. With his brother Hank, John has co-created many online video projects, including Vlog Brothers, which you are all obviously incredibly familiar with, and the educational channel Crash Course. He lives with his family in Indianapolis, and you can visit him online at johngreenbooks.com. Tonight we are thrilled to share in the launch of the Anthropocene Reviewed, the book of the podcast that digs deep into the earth of the human era. Humans are the weirdest animals. Humankind is unlike any animal that has ever visited our planet's surface before. Only we have changed the planet like this. Only we, as far as we know, have perceived it the way we do. And only we, among living creatures, have shaped the destiny of our little ball of rock the way that we have. Tonight, we overturn a few smaller rocks and explore how we tick, how we overthink, how we create and change and explore and envision and reinvent the world that we've inherited and depend on. It is an absolute pleasure to welcome John Green and Clint Smith III. We'll imagine all of your faces, so everyone give them your very warmest Zoom chat welcome.
Thank you so much. That was so lovely. Alex, is it possible for you to travel around the country and tell people what my book is about? Because I have not been able to articulate it that well. Humans are the weirdest animals. I actually think that's a great 4-word summary or 5-word summary of the situation in which we find ourselves. So I wrote this book, The Anthropocene Reviewed, over the last 3.5 years, as I was also writing a podcast of the same name. A lot of the essays are from the podcast, but they've all been changed to in small ways or in big ways. And one of the ways that many of the essays have been changed in the book is that I started out wanting to write in 2018 about the places where my little life was running up against the big forces of human history, the big forces of economic and political and social systems that were shaping contemporary experience. And then in March of 2020, a very large historical force arrived in the United States, which is the reason that we're not together today, the reason that we're not all able to do this in person. And that changed the podcast. It also changed the book that I ended up writing. And so when I was revisiting some of the older essays, I found that it was impossible to reckon with them without also reckoning with the pandemic. So I wanted to open by reading to you a little bit from the essay in the book about humanity's temporal range. The temporal range of a species is the time in which that species lives. So the temporal range of elephants extends back several million years. The temporal range of the reptile species Tuatara extends back almost 250 million years to before Earth's supercontinent of Pangaea split apart. The temporal range of humanity begins somewhere around 250,000 years ago and ends, we don't know when. And only one of us will be around to find out. So I wrote an essay about humanity's temporal range, and then as it happened, while I was editing that essay, the pandemic took hold in the United States. And I was never able to respond to that really in the podcast, but I tried to respond to it in the book. So I wanted to read a section of the podcast, a section of the book from that essay that talks about those early days, those initial initial days of reckoning with what would turn out to be one of the bigger events in my lifetime. In the spring of 2020, a few weeks after the emergence of the novel coronavirus began to shut schools and clear out grocery stores in the US, someone sent me a collection they'd made of times I'd publicly mentioned my fear of infectious disease pandemics. On the podcast 10 Things That Scare Me, I'd listed near the top, quote, a global disease pandemic that will result in the breakdown of human norms. Years earlier, in a video about world history, I'd speculated about what might happen, quote, if some superbug shows up tomorrow and travels all these global trade routes. In 2019, I'd said on a podcast, we all must prepare ourselves for the global pandemic we all know is coming. And yet, I did nothing to prepare. The future, even in its inevitabilities, always feels vague and nebulous to me until it doesn't.
Hi, Maggie. Don't watch
After
this.
I found a mask that I bought years
Love ya.
earlier to minimize sawdust inhalation while building their treehouse.
Anyway.
But long before I understood the scope of the pandemic, I called my brother Hank and told him I was feeling frightened. Hank is the level-headed one, the sane one, the calm one. He always has been. We have never let the fact of my being older get in the way of Hank being the wise older brother. Ever since we were little, one of the ways I've managed my anxiety is by looking to him. My brain cannot reliably report to me whether a perceived threat is really real, and so I look at Hank, and I see that he's not panicked, and I tell myself that I'm okay. If anything were truly wrong, Hank wouldn't be able to portray such calm confidence. So I told him I was scared. The species will survive this, he answered, a little hitch in his voice. The species will survive this? That's all you've got for me? He paused. I could hear the tremble in his breath, the tremble I've been hearing in my breath our whole lives. That's what I've got for you, he said after a moment. I told Hank I'd bought 60 cans of Diet Dr. Pepper so that I could drink 2 for each day of the pandemic. And only then could I hear the old smile, the my brother really is a piece of work smile. For someone who has spent 4 decades worrying about disease pandemics, he said, you sure don't know how disease pandemics work. Complex organisms tend to have shorter temporal ranges than simple ones. And humanity faces tremendous challenges. We need to find a way to survive ourselves, to go on in a world where we are powerful enough to warm the entire planet, but not powerful enough to stop warming it. We may even have to survive our own obsolescence as technology learns to do more of what we can do better than we can do it. But we are better positioned to solve our biggest problems than we were 100 or 1,000 years ago. Humans have more collective brain power than we've ever had, and more resources and more knowledge collected by our ancestors. We are also shockingly, stupidly persistent. Early humans probably used many strategies for hunting and fishing, but a common one was persistence hunting. In a persistence hunt, the predator relies on tracking prowess and sheer perseverance. We would follow prey for hours, and each time it would run away from us, and we'd follow, and it would run away again, and we'd follow, and it would run away again, until finally the quarry became too exhausted to continue. That's how for tens of thousands of years we've been eating creatures faster and stronger than us. We just keep going. One of my favorite words is dogged. I love dogged pursuits and dogged efforts and dogged determination. Now, don't get me wrong, dogs are indeed very dogged, but they ought to call it human determination. Change, Octavia Butler wrote, is the one unavoidable, irresistible, ongoing reality of the universe. And who am I to say that we are done changing? Who am I to say that Butler was wrong when she wrote, the destiny of Earthseed is to take root among the stars? These days, I choose to believe that our persistence and our adaptability will allow us to keep changing with the universe for a very, very long time. So far, at a paltry 250,000 years, it's hard to give humanity's temporal range more than 1 star. But while I initially found my brother's words distressing, these days I find myself repeating them and believing them. He was right. He always is. The species will survive this, and much more to come. And so, in hope and in expectation, I give our temporal range 4 stars. So that's a little bit of my new book, The Anthropocene Reviewed. I've never read it out loud to an audience before, even a Zoom audience, so I apologize if I was nervous. I was feeling nervous. But it's lovely to be able to share it with you, and I'm really excited for y'all to be able to read the whole book, starting today or tomorrow, hopefully. And I am so grateful to our hosts this evening, who have persevered through exceptionally difficult times for bookstores and for live theaters, the Community Bookstore, Brookline Booksmith, Gibson's, and the Wilbur Theater. These are all really special community institutions. And I know that not all of y'all live in the Northeast, like people didn't necessarily pick their Zoom spots based on where they actually live. But if you are fortunate enough to live near any of these stores, please visit them, and when you can visit them due to circumstances, order books from them, because there are not a lot of bookstores as good as those 3. So I am very grateful to them for hosting us tonight, and so grateful to Clint Smith for joining me. Just to give you a brief introduction to Clint Smith and his work. He's a staff writer at The Atlantic, and he's also the author of a book of poetry called Counting Descent, which longtime Nerdfighters have heard me talk about a lot, because I just think it's a really wonderful book. And he is the author of the forthcoming nonfiction book, How the Word is Passed, which explores how different historical sites reckon with, or fail to reckon with, their relationship to the history of slavery. That book comes out on June 1st, and I know that I'm here to promote the Anthropocene Reviewed, and I do intend to promote it aggressively, but How the Word is Passed is one of the best books I've ever read. It's a very special book, and sentence to sentence, it's just an astonishment. And both as an academic work, as a work of journalism, and then just purely as a work of literature, it is very special. I have never read anything quite like it, and I feel so fortunate to be joined by Clint Smith this evening. So, Clint, if you're here, say hello.
I had to stave off the tears because that was very kind of you and very generous of you. It was so wonderful to hear you read. You have been in my ears for so much of this pandemic. I feel like I have markers of like my pandemic experience. Like when we look back on this strange, terrible, uncertain, precarious 14 months we've lived through, running through the woods while John excavates the histories and idiosyncrasies of Halley's Comet will always be something that stays with me. So I'm grateful to you and your good heart and your generous spirit, and I'm grateful that you would invited me to be part of this conversation because we don't have a lot of time, but we have enough time to ask you some of the questions that I've wanted to ask you over the course of this past year, having listened to the podcast and then spent time with the iterations of the essays that made it into the book. And so thrilled to be here with all of the Nerdfighters. It's like I'm a long-time listener, first-time caller type of but this is it's a delight to be here. So let's hop right in because we have limited time. and we talked about this a little bit before, but my background is poetry. That's how I came into writing. And one of the things I loved most about this book was the poetic sensibility to it. It was almost Neruda-esque, right? Like it felt like so many of the essays were these brief meditations and odes to these things that you love, like ode to Indianapolis, to AFC Wimbledon, to Mario Kart, to Love at First Sight, to your old boss at Booklist, to the Indianapolis 500, sycamore trees, sunsets, and some of them were what the essay was about. But also, what I loved was the way that there were almost reviews within the reviews. Like the review was not about your boss at Booklist, but like within sort of fit within that review was this sort of mini meditation and appreciation of him. Yeah. So I'm curious, like how you went about deciding which things to review. I know you solicited some from people and they emailed you, but how did you decide what you wanted to write about? Was there a point where you were like, I'm writing about too many good things, I need to balance it out, write about some things that suck? Or did you, learn how you, and within that, I'm curious if like you knew did you know that sunsets were going to be 5 stars when you started, or do you kind of figure out what the rating is going to be as you are writing it and you don't actually know until the end?
Yeah, so I mean, those are really interesting questions. I mean, as far as choosing topics, I appreciate you. You always, anytime you write a book, you always want somebody to like say something that wasn't in the book that you were thinking about, and you just did that. So I just want to acknowledge that and say thank you, because I did want them to be odes, and even the ones that are maybe negative reviews, I wanted them to be odes to something else. Like if I don't particularly love Canada Geese, but I wanted that to be an ode to the strange situation that we're in, where we have unprecedented power, but as individuals, many of us much of the time don't feel that power. And then and then writing that basically love letter to my boss at Booklist was very important to me, because I think that if he hadn't, so for those who don't know, I tried to quit my job in the middle of what I guess used to be called a nervous breakdown. I had a mental health crisis, and I tried to quit my job. This is before the Family Medical Leave Act, and my boss was just like, "Why don't you just take a few weeks off and then call us back and see how you're doing?" And that allowed me to go on and have a really wonderful life that I don't know I would have had if it hadn't been for him being that generous. So I did want to write an ode there. I didn't think about. I never worried about like this is 3 stars or this is 5. I always sort of knew that was like not very important. In fact, like some of the star rating has changed, even from the book to the audiobook. A couple times I was reading the book during recording the audiobook, and I was like, nah, I'm not feeling 2.5 stars now. I feel more like 2. Right. But the sunsets thing, so I had never rated it. I'd never rated anything 5 stars really, and it had become like a bit of a thing with listeners to the podcast. And a really wonderful poet who's a friend of mine, Katrina Vandenberg, she wrote me an email, and she was like, "I really like your podcast, and I'm enjoying it. But if you don't give the cave paintings at Lascaux 5 stars, I don't understand what you're doing." And in that moment, I was like, I also don't know what I'm doing. I've painted myself into a corner, and I don't know the way out of this. And then as I was writing the review of Sunsets, I was like, oh, I see a way out of this.
And did you know when you were, like before you were writing it, that this would be a 5-star sort of thing? Did you write into the 5-star-ness of the...
Yeah. So I knew I wanted to write an essay in Sunsets. I knew I wanted to write about this problem that I have, that I think other people have, but I only know it from the inside with me, which is that I almost always want to respond, especially on the internet, with my irony up, and with my cynicism up, and with my armor up, because I know how vulnerable I am to people hitting me where I'm earnest. And so I knew that I wanted to write about that in the context of sunsets because there's like nothing that I know of that's more cliched in its beauty than a sunset, but also more beautiful. I mean, the tension between paintings of sunsets being the lamest paintings in the world and also paintings of sunsets capturing what is most beautiful about the natural world to me. So yeah, I knew what I kind of knew what I was trying to do, and it was actually expanded from a Vlogbrothers video. Like a lot of my writing is, I'll hit on the little something on a Tuesday, and then 6 months later, I'll still be thinking about it and wonder what I can do with it.
And that kind of brings me to another thing that I was wondering about. Is you write across so many different, not even genres now, as this is your debut nonfiction book, which is very exciting. But you write across so many different mediums. And I'm curious, this is my sort of writerly question, how you experience, are you bringing different questions or different sensibilities to your fiction as compared to your podcast writing, as compared to your Vlogbrothers scripts? How do you are there demarcations between them, or do they sort of flow into each other osmosis style?
So there for a long time there was a big demarcation in my mind. I don't know that it was really real though, which is that I'd always been taught and believed that fiction is like writing a novel is your attempt to make a gift for someone else, and that it's not about you, and that it can't be about you, and that it has to be a gift. And when I was writing, if I was writing a Vlogbrothers video or an episode of Crash Course, I would not feel the same level of focus on other people, focus on what it's like for someone else. I mean, that's the thing about writing fiction that's so enjoyable too, is that you're escaping, you're trying to escape yourself. You're trying to imagine what it's like to be someone else. You're trying to write for and about other people. Yeah. And I think that's one of the reasons I started like wanting to make Vlogbrothers in the first place, is that I felt like I was, had lost track of myself a little bit in those first few years of trying to write novels. But what I discovered from writing Vlogbrothers videos, and then especially from writing Crash Course videos, is that you can write about history and it can still be a gift for other people. Like it can still, be something that you're trying to make, a way that you're trying to reach out, to connect to people. And so I think that had to break down for me over a long time, but like working a lot on Crash Course was super helpful to me, just in terms of imagining this project, because I don't think I ever would have thought to, I had such a negative opinion of nonfiction in general. One of my friends from high school is the brilliant novelist Daniel Alarcon, and I remember when Daniel started writing nonfiction pieces, like writing journalism for the New Yorker. I emailed him and I was like, man, you gotta let that stuff go. You gotta make proper art. Now I go back and I read those New Yorker pieces and I'm like, oh no, this is proper art. It's just like a different kind of art.
Did you, how is the experience of, so most of this was written before the pandemic. But you were, revising and editing and putting the book together, I imagine, over the course of this strange, precarious year. And I know you've written a bit about how the podcast was an attempt to sort of step away from fiction in a way that you felt like you had gotten lost, well, perhaps not lost, but it was not it was not what it had once been for you, right? And you needed a different space to provide you, both as a writer and an artist, and as a person, with like a different venue to explore and excavate questions that you had once explored in fiction, but now we're exploring it in a different way. So I'm just curious, like what I was finishing my book over the course of the pandemic and, doing editing a book and finishing a book in a way that I could have never imagined. And I'm curious what that experience has been like for you. And you have 2 kids, and I have 2 small children who I've been Zoom bombed so many times this pandemic. It's just like,
oh yeah, it's not out of the question for us.
Yeah, my 4-year-old might get up at any moment. So if you hear somebody banging on my door. But yeah, just like given all of your responsibilities as a partner, as a father of 2 kids, like how did you navigate writing? To what extent did you create routines, or did you just say like, look, I don't know what's going to happen each day? What was the pandemic experience? That's a big question. I keep asking you small questions that become big. How was the pandemic for you in terms of putting this together?
I mean, it was really hard. I don't know what it's like to try to edit a nonfiction book, not in a global disease pandemic, but it was really hard. And right at the beginning of the pandemic, Sarah had her book "You Are an Artist" come out, and we had to really scramble to make that happen, to move all the tours to Zoom tours, to figure out what a Zoom tour even was going to look like. And so it was helpful, I think, to have that experience in our back pocket. Like we kind of knew a little bit of what it was like, but the writing of this book was really fun. I mean, in a lot of ways, it was the most fun I've ever had writing. But the last sort of 2 rounds of edits were really difficult, not because they were that difficult, but because of life. Because it was happening alongside the challenges of e-learning and dealing with family stuff, and my parents just had moved next door, and dealing with just how tough it is for kids to learn in a virtual setting. And so those were the things I think that made it challenging. And then also there were a little bit of a change in deadlines because of the nature of publishing changed. There's a paper shortage. There's like a global paper shortage, which was surprising. Like these little things that you don't think are going to have an impact on your life, but if they take a week away from your schedule, it's a pretty significant week.
Right. I want to incorporate some questions that we've gotten from the audience, both questions that people are placing now. If you have questions, please place them in the Q&A box, and you can vote on them if you find one you particularly like. But some that were sent in before that I'm curious about. Morella has asked, if you could pick your last words, what would you want them to be?
So when I was younger, I used to say that like the worst possible last words were "I love you," because they're just so like cheesy and over the top and everything. And that's like a ton of people's last words.
Yeah.
And I would sometimes say that like if you're gonna say "I love you," you should do it like W.C. Fields did it, where his last words were "Goddamn the whole world and everything in it but you, Carlotta," which is like less lovely when you learn that Carlotta was not his spouse. And that his spouse was presumably pretty disappointed by W.C. Fields' choice to make his last moment about another person. Now I think that those would be great last words. I hope that I'm with people I love when I die, and I hope that I'm able to tell them.
Ben Lerner, I recently read his book, The Topeka School, which was excellent. And there's a line in it where he says, I'm going to butcher it, but it's essentially something like sometimes the things that are cliche are like they're cliche because they're the most resonant, they're the most true, right?
Yeah.
He said it in a far more beautiful way than that, but I thought about that when we were talking about sunsets. I think about that in the context of, I love you being your last words. Or words that you say at any point. I mean, for me, I know certainly that the pandemic has made me much more present than I was before. It's forced me to. I think I was traveling. I was on the road at least once a week before the pandemic, and I have 2 young children, and this is the longest I've not been on a plane in my adult life. And so,
Yeah.
so I do, even just like coming downstairs from my office and like my 2-year-old running around the corner saying like, I love you, it's like, it's cliche, it's this thing, they tell you about parenthood and you're like, oh, you know, it's hard, but it goes by so fast. And anyway, I'm just thinking about like the idea of cliches and how sometimes like there are these, cliches get a bad rap sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, they just.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do think we have to try to find ways to express ourselves in ways that will really connect to people and that people will understand us and believe us and hear what we're meaning. And so there is a reason for like precision of language and everything, but with my kids, like they don't need to hear a super precise analysis of why I love them. Like they just need to know that I love them. And it has been very much the same for me. In fact, one of the last times I was out of the house was with you.
Yeah, that was really, was that February?
Mid-February. So
Yeah.
It wasn't that long before things started to fall apart. And I remember there was a wonderful evening. We had a great dinner, and thank God we did, because it was pretty much the only memory I had of going to dinner with friends for the next 15 months.
Oh man, it was a lovely time. How would this is for both of us? How would you rate being a fan of Liverpool and Arsenal Football Club, respectively, in the 2020-2021 season on a 5-star scale? Your answer's got to be different than it was.
Yeah, we had. I'll tell you, we've had a 3-star season followed by a 5-star 3 seconds.
Oh man!
Seeing, it's for those who don't know, Clint's a big fan of Arsenal. I'm a big fan of Liverpool, and Liverpool, for the first time in their 130-year history, had a goal scored by our goalie. And not just any goal, but a really, really good goal, and a really important goal, and a really vital moment. And I was watching it live. My family was actually out of town for the first time since the pandemic started, and so I was alone in the house, and I was watching it live, and I was so angry. I was so mad. I couldn't believe that we were going to fail to beat West Brom, and I was really struggling with regulating emotion, as I do, like the week before a book comes out. And then he scored with a header, and I felt like I cried the whole year of tears. Like I cried for everything and I cried because like I was reminded that there's still beauty and wonder and hope in the world, and even amid all of this, the suffering and injustice that we're seeing right now, that in this stupid, meaningless game, there is still this phenomenally human, wonderful moment. So I'm sorry to brag about that, Clint, because I know it's been a terrible season for Arsenal. So I probably shouldn't like wax too poetic about how good it's been to be a Liverpool fan.
It has been a 1.5-star season for football club. I feel like we won't get sidetracked into this too much, but I really, like many Arsenal fans, we like took Arsene Wenger for granted. We're in the Champions League every year. We were in the quarterfinal, round of 16 of the Champions League every year, and we're like, oh, we have only won 3 FA Cups. Why haven't we won the league? And now, now I'm sitting here at the end of May being like, will we qualify for the Europa League? It's a joke. So Thierry Henry many years ago tricked me into being an Arsenal fan, and I've been unable to let go since. It's been a hard time. But one of the things I love most about how you wrote about soccer in the book was like soccer as community.
Yeah.
Like soccer as this thing that like when we step out of it and like look, when we're looking at it through a sort of purely logical lens, it doesn't make any sense that we are so deeply invested in these like strangers on a different continent kicking a ball around. I've never even been to the Emirates Stadium, right? Like, so I've seen Arsenal play. I've seen them when they come here. I saw them once when I was like 13 in Amsterdam when I was on a soccer trip. But like for me to be as emotionally invested in this team is somewhat bizarre, but also there's this entire sort of community, both online and in the real world, And some of my of Arsenal supporters, and some of my best memories in life are of like being at a bar of strangers in Washington D.C. with Arsenal supporters who I just met, and like largely I was gonna say celebrating. We were probably mostly commiserating. We're crying on each other's shoulders.
But yeah, it's very. I mean, that is it. It is, and the truth is, like, whatever you build your communities around, it's about the quality of community. It's not about the thing. And like, I don't really care if it's fashion, if it's sports, if it's classic cars. I care about the quality of the community that you build around it. And the wonderful thing about football is because it is a global game, and because especially teams like Arsenal are truly global teams, it's a point of connection everywhere. It's so yeah, you have this wonderful moment of like being with strangers in DC where you live, but you can also, like, at the Champions League final, I happened to be in New York, and I went to Carragher's pub and had an amazing, I was held by many strangers who were crying into my shoulder, and I was crying into their shoulders, and it's hard to get that anywhere else. Like, it's hard to get that feeling anywhere else. And so for me, that's the big thing about football, is that it's a point of connection. Everywhere I go, it's a way. It's a way into conversations.
Yeah, and I mean, I think a lot about. So I lived abroad. I studied abroad in Senegal, and lived abroad for a year in South Africa. And I remember when I went to Senegal, I had an Arsenal jersey. And I was living in this very remote village, Kédougou, in eastern Senegal. And like a young boy came up to me. I was wearing this Arsenal jersey, and he was just like, in French, he was like, "That's my favorite team." And then he invited me to play with him and his friends. And then I like went and had dinner with his family. I mean, the way that it serves as this entry point.
Yeah.
Anywhere you go in the world.
Yeah.
It's just always, it makes the way that Henri bamboozled me into Arsenal supporter, being an Arsenal supporter. It makes it okay.
It's worth it. Because Arsenal is a great team to support if you want to have a truly international community. I think Liverpool's getting there, but we have a ways to go.
Indeed. A couple questions from the chat that have come through. Carrie is asking, what was the easiest review to write or rate, and what was the most difficult?
The hardest to write was this essay that's in the book about wintry mix, this form of precipitation, just because I tried to write it for like 3 years and I could never quite figure it out. And then I finally found a way into it just before the book had to go to press. So that was probably the most challenging. None of them were that easy, to be honest with you. There's an essay in the book, actually, the essay in the podcast that's going to come out tomorrow. One of the reviews is about this hot dog stand in Iceland, and that was pretty fun to write. It was pretty straightforward. I love that hot dog stand. I had an amazing day in Iceland. I was with people I love. I knew what I wanted to say, and I had a pretty straight road to saying it. So that was probably the easiest.
It's a pretty fantastic combo. Hot dogs, Iceland.
Oh man, I mean, I've only spent 1 day in Iceland, so I don't know if I can recommend it or not, but I can recommend the hell out of that hot dog stand.
Yeah, there you go. Was there something, Celine is asking, what do you wish that you reviewed for the book, but couldn't make it work, or didn't get?
Monoblock chairs. There's this particular kind of chair that's made from one plastic mold that you see everywhere, and once you know about them, you see them everywhere. You see them in the poorest communities in the world, and you see them in the richest communities in the world. Like people at the fanciest weddings on earth sit in monoblock chairs, and I am totally fascinated by monoblock chairs. There's actually a monoblock chair at the
I have to Google.
Yeah, I'm obsessed with them. So I wish that I tried to write about them, but I just couldn't find what was interesting about them.
Monoblock.
Huh. You just Google it, you'll be like, oh, I've seen that chair. I've seen that chair everywhere I've ever been.
Right. It's like the beach chair.
Yeah, it's like the beach chair, but it's also like.
Well, I guess it looks like there's a lot of different iterations of it.
Yeah, the idea. Yeah, there's I'll send you a note later about the classic one, but there are. The main thing is that they're made out of one single plastic mold, which makes them very cheap to make, but also you can make kind of an infinite number of them.
Okay. Beautiful.
And I try to write about them in like the context of reproducible art and how like we value what is scarce, but we ought to value what is available for all. But I couldn't make it work. It felt a little bit forced.
I mean, this is why your poems are. I mean, it's fascinating. You and Kava live in the same city because so much of your work in that regard reminds me of one another, right? Like where I think Kava often uses nature or the natural world as and then like creates it sort of as the entry point, and then creates a metaphor based on that that puts together these things that are in conversation with one another in ways that you could have never imagined. I feel like you did that so often through the book in these really, you're sitting here and you're like, well, you're thinking about Halley's Comet, and then it's also becomes this sort of meditation on like building a bench with your father, and then it was just, I think that was so well done, and it was really moving the way you take an idea and then sort of whether through a sort of memoiristic style or sort of an analysis of other parts of the world, just putting things in conversation that otherwise wouldn't be in so many ways. Was that an intentional thing, or did that kind of happen through the writing process?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible that some of that is in response to Kava's work, because I spent a lot of time reading. We're talking about the poet Kava Akbar, whose most recent book is called Calling a Wolf, and whose work I read, I don't know, weekly at least, and I really, really like. And so it's possible that some of that came from those poems. But I like to. For me, one of the pleasures of writing these essays is pretending like you're writing about one thing, but you're really writing about something else, or because I also think that sometimes if you approach subjects directly, especially big, difficult topics like climate change or places where it's easy for people to just sort of shut down because the problem is overwhelming and the scope of the problem is overwhelming, and we feel powerless before it. Like if you approach those directly, it's easy to just say, I think I'm going to pay attention to something else because I have a pretty broad information landscape and I don't have to think about climate change right now. And if I do think about it, it's just going to freak me out and I'm not going to feel good. And so I'm interested in trying to find ways to approach those big questions through other questions, so that so that we're just kind of surprised that this can be a way of thinking about that. That air conditioning can be a way of thinking about climate change, or that monoblock chairs can be a way of thinking about scarcity.
Yeah.
Now that I'm saying that, I'm thinking maybe I can do it.
That's what I'm saying. I was like, sometimes you just need to, excavate a little further. So I want to be mindful of time. We're going to do two more questions and then we'll transition. Kate is asking, how are things in your garden this year?
So the garden has gone through a huge renovation. I've gone all in on the garden this year. We had a very successful last year, but I think we needed to continue to be ambitious. So that's actually Ashley Ford is my neighbor. For those of y'all who don't know, and so we often talk while I'm in the garden. She'll stop by and keep me company. And I built raised beds this year, and we're growing lots and lots of beans. I'm trying to increase my yield per square foot, with the idea being that I would like to harvest a tomato that individually costs less than $73 to make. Everybody has an ambition, and that's mine.
There you go. I think baby steps, and then. Last question before we transition to the next part of this, which is an important one, but I lost it. A big part of the Anthropocene Reviewed, this is Will asking, is hope. How do you remain hopeful in such difficult times, COVID or otherwise?
It is a really difficult time, and I think one of the things that bothers me about hope, or the way that hope is often talked about, is that it's often talked about as a way of minimizing suffering, or especially as a way of minimizing structural injustice, as a way to say, well, we don't have to worry too much about these problems of the world because they're going to be solved in the next life, or because they're going to be solved in the fullness of time, as a way of taking agency, especially away from the powerful, the most powerful people, and saying, well, the most powerful people don't really need to engage with problems of injustice because it's uncomfortable and those structures benefit us, and so let's just like send a message of hope out there. That is, I think, the wrong way to think about hope, and the way that I've tried to think about hope is the way that I've been taught about hope by people who don't benefit from those structures of injustice, and that is that despair is not productive. Despair does not help us get to a world. Nihilism does not help us get to a world that is more fair for more people. Doesn't help us get to a world that is more just for more people. And so the way that I tried to write about hope in this book, and the way that I try to think about hope in my work, is that there is cause for hope, because the story of humans tells us lots of stories where there is cause for hope, and tells us lots of stories that when people respond with hope and real, meaningful, deep solidarity, the human story gets stronger. And when people respond with hopelessness and nihilism and despair, often the story of humans takes a step backward. So the kind of hope I believe in is the kind of hope that sings, as Emily Dickinson famously put it, that sings the tune without the words and never stops at all, and that is available to all of us at all times. And what is difficult for me is to listen, is to hear it. But I hear it in cries for justice. I hear it in people who are fighting for a better world, and I hear it in my kids. I see it in them, in their wish for a better world, and their commitment to make a better and safer place for humans and other animals. So yeah, that's the kind of hope that I believe in, and it is really important to me. For me, hope is not like it's not like a philosophical concept or a matter of intellectual curiosity. It's a prerequisite for survival. I can't get up and do anything if I don't have it. So I have to look for it aggressively every day, but not in a way that is going to minimize the reality of suffering or injustice.
I appreciate you saying that. Shall we transition into the next part?
Okay, guys, we're going to play a game. I'm going to bring in my spouse, Sarah Urist Green, to help us play this game. Clint, I appreciate in advance your willingness to play this game.
Sarah, hello.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Clint, congratulations on your fantastic book. I enjoyed it tremendously, and I see this guy all the time. So
Yeah.
I know this is his event, but
I felt the same
I'm
way.
really
I
excited
also
to talk to
I
you.
also felt like we should talk about the really good book
Yeah.
that's here.
yeah, come on. I already know about this one.
Yeah. Also, I think everybody who's here has already bought this book, so we really need to go all in on how the word is passed.
Yeah.
But so here's the game, everybody. And full disclosure, I truly have no idea how this is going to go. If it goes horribly, this will be the only time we
But
play the
those
game.
are the best kinds of games.
This is great.
So we're gonna attempt to collaboratively write a review, Clint, Sarah, and me, but also all 350 people in chat. So that's why it could go sideways. So when I'm developing ideas for essays in this book, one of the games that I like to play is actually a game I learned from Sarah's book, You Are an Artist. It's a game called Never See, Never Will, where you imagine or you think of something.
Well, it started out as an assignment.
She's going to tell us what it is.
Yeah, how about I tell it some.
Bring out your book. Also really good.
Yeah,
Available.
it's a really good book. It's called You Are an Artist, And I went around and asked a lot of artists to give out an assignment to the audience based on their own ways of working.
Yeah.
So this one is called, this assignment is given by the artist David Brooks, and it's called Never Seen, Never Will.
Not the New York Times columnist, just to clarify.
Different David Brooks.
Different David Brooks. Totally different person. Didn't
yes.
do anything wrong to be named David Brooks, just happened to be named David Brooks.
Yes. So David was thinking about this print that Albrecht Dürer made in 1515 of a rhinoceros that you've probably seen before.
It's such a good.
It's hard to. It's not going to look very good.
It's going to look great when we get it really close to the camera.
No, it is. But yeah.
But the thing
Anyway, but the cool thing about it is that Dürer had never seen a rhinoceros before, but he had read a description. So he drew the rhinoceros without ever having seen it. And it's kind of amazing how right he got it. The description described it as having bony plates, almost like armor. And if you see the picture, he really did draw it with bony plates.
This person never saw a rhinoceros.
He never saw a rhinoceros.
He had never seen a rhinoceros. No.
He died without ever seeing a rhinoceros.
So,
unbelievable.
It's a pretty good rhinoceros for somebody who'd never seen a rhinoceros.
So David Brooks was thinking about this when he was making a body of work about endangered species. And he wanted to figure out a way to bring form to these animals that are just disappearing from our world. So from the list of most endangered species, he sort of selected some like pygmy hippos, hairy-nosed wombats, and some Sumatran orangutans. And then he assembled sculptures out of marble and aluminum blocks that equaled the average weight of each of these, because he wanted to sort of give them a presence. And their average weight was a statistic that he had access to. So here is the Sumatran orangutan as made into form from marble blocks. And then they're displayed in a crate with sort of the name and weight next to it.
So the assignment is to think of something that you've never seen and never will see, but still have like a strong opinion about, or still know something about, and find a way to articulate it. So, for instance, there was one response when Sarah made this initial. One of the most moving responses I thought when Sarah made this initial thing was from a young man who had been imprisoned for life and drew what he understood to be the view from, or what he imagined to be the view looking in at his cell block, as opposed to the only view that he has, which is the view looking out from the cell block.
Right. And
there's another person who drew their father,
who they had never met.
Who they had never met and understood that they likely would never meet.
Right. But there's lots of ways to do this. I remember someone made a response that was describing what they thought their upstairs neighbor's apartment looked like, because they lived in a big building and heard this individual all the time, but never knew never knew who they were. So I
would argue that actually you could see them if you were highly motivated. But yeah, the concept is
what are some things?
I use this game when I'm thinking about I used this game 2 times when I was writing the book. Once when I wrote the essay about Staphylococcus aureus, which is this bacteria that colonizes me and causes really severe infections at times in my life, but that I can't see, but that is still a huge presence in my life, and I'll never see, but I kind of know what it looks like from quote unquote photographs of it that aren't like totally photographs as we think of photographs. And then I also used it when writing about the Kauai-o'o, this extinct bird species that I will never see, but I've seen photographs of and I've heard the song of. And so I was able to have an opinion about it.
Andy says, I always think about the internal monologues of others.
Oh, that's very good, Andy. I don't know if we can do that tonight.
Inside of a beaver lodge.
Internal monologue.
That's pretty funny.
Inside of a beaver lodge. I mean, I think we could get in there. All right.
Not from the point of view of a
It's true.
beaver,
I'll never
no.
know what it's like to be a beaver. That's one of the weird things.
Library of
Alexandria is
Alexandria.
very good. So I'll just while you guys are saying in chat ideas for what you've never seen and never will, I want to give you my thesis that's leading to this game. My thesis is that everything is interesting if we pay extremely careful attention, and that anything can lead to anything can help us to understand the universe better, because it's not about what the thing is, it's about the quality of our attention. We're gonna do, okay, you guys have 3 seconds left. Sarah,
What?
the quality of the scrolling is moving very poor.
John's a pro scroller and gets very.
So is this? Is this the part where we're naming we're throwing
Yeah, if you have any ideas.
The Argentinosaurus.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
That's really good. We're gonna do Clint's.
Inside of a trash compactor.
I saw that actually in Star Wars, but I haven't seen it from the inside. You're right.
My
remote coworker's legs. Let's do Clint's. Let's do the Argentinosaurus.
Yeah.
Clint, first, can you tell me what you know about the Argentinosaurus while chat begins to investigate the Argentinosaurus?
The Argentinosaurus is the largest dinosaur to ever exist. It is a part of I will never, because what the premise of is something that has impacted your life that you will never see or meet. You'll never meet, presumably, an Argentinosaurus. But my son, as is the case with many young children, is obsessed with, just like I've learned more about dinosaurs in the past year than I ever knew was possible. And so my son's favorite dinosaurs have moved between the Pachycephalosaurus, the Argentinosaurus, and the Parasaurolophus. And so when we pretend to be dinosaurs,
There's probably some song in it.
pretends to be the Argentinosaurus. Almost what's most remarkable about the Argentinosaurus is actually that it is.
Hi Maggie,
still
we're back
not
from
as
our
big
walk.
as the blue whale, which really gives
Oh,
me
that's
a
great.
Wow.
That's great.
how, cause you imagine the biggest dinosaur to ever exist. You're like, there's nothing on the planet like
It's
that.
still going.
And then the blue whale is still bigger. And even for me, I don't think I had a sense of, because I've never seen a blue whale. I don't know if I will. I would love to, but I don't think we have a sense of how massive the blue whale is. Its heart is the size of a pickup truck, right? I don't know.
I'm looking at an Argentinosaurus now, and what I'm seeing, my initial thought from the thing that I'm seeing is that what is that bone called that's in your lower leg? Is that your femur?
Yeah.
Or is that your top leg? Whatever. One of its leg bones, it seems to be about human-sized.
The bone is, yes, the single leg bone.
Just the single lower leg bone seems to be about the height of a person, which in and of itself is wondrous to think about, you know?
This makes me think the review should be about the blue whale. But I guess you could anyway.
We're sticking with this never seen, never will thing.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
The whole idea is that we just have to keep paying close attention.
Right.
Anybody else coming up with anything interesting about the Argentinosaurus? I think there's something lovely to me about excavating a bone and discovering that it is your size. That it is. Do you think that's part of why kids love big dinosaurs? Is because they are small and they are surrounded by big people, and they think they think these people are, these people think they're big, but wait till they find out about Argentinosaurus.
Right. No.
Thank goodness for children and their fascination with dinosaurs, because I feel like us adults are so jaded about them. We're like, we remember dinosaurs. I don't encounter a lot of adults who get really excited about dinosaurs.
And we should. It's amazing. I honestly didn't even know. I grew up and I was like, oh, the Brontosaurus, and then that was the long neck, and then the Brontosaurus, it didn't exist anymore. And you're like, oh no, this thing that I thought existed for so long, it's just a lie. And then they're like, oh well, maybe it does exist, and
Yeah, it's back.
Yeah, it's like back, and it's all very confusing.
It is.
But I was saying that because I thought that my only conception of like the long-necked dinosaur was the Brontosaurus, and then the Apatosaurus, and I thought the Brontosaurus wasn't real. And then I realized that there's like so many long-necked dinosaurs: the Diplodocus, the Brontosaurus, the Apatosaurus, the Argentinosaurus. There were so many. Its top speed was 5 miles an hour. It was slow. It was very slow.
Wow, that's very slow. How's your review going, John?
It's good so far. I'm waiting for chat to come through. I think I have some good ideas. We have no idea how it holds up its neck. That's very good.
Oh.
We don't know how it could hold up its neck.
I mean, that neck is something.
Yeah.
I also like that it lived for 4 million years, which is, I'm not good at math, but that's at least 16 times longer than we've been around, and we think that we're a very big deal.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I love most about your book too, was the like ways that the like different conceptions of measuring time, where you were like, we are only, what did you say? We're only 2 Halley's Comets away from the emancipation of slavery. And I was like,
wow,
man, I mean, it's something that that I've been obsessed with over the course of writing my book, is our proximity to that period of history, and how this history we tell ourselves is a long time ago wasn't that long ago at all. And then you're like, the Argentinosaurus lived for 4 million years, and we're like, we're like 100.
And we're here trying to be like 140 years ago. That's ancient history. Like, no, it's not. It's barely even one lifetime.
Truly.
Oh man, it's so true. I do find it helpful to think of, because really we shouldn't think of life in decades. We should think of it in 80-year chunks, because we should think of it in human lifetimes or in Halley's or whatever. And I do find it helpful to be like, well, to be clear, like, the time before Mark Twain died while Halley's Comet was blazing in the sky in Connecticut in 1910. It's not just that enslavement was the law of the land in the United States. It was that it was going to be the law of the land in the United States for several more decades. At the population. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying the chat. Everybody's so creative. Don't cry for me, Argentinosaurus. I like that. That was good. Grace.
Well, but so yeah, we do have. So is that where this review is going about? Experience of time, like what's the core?
Do we know what their lifespans were? That would be very helpful to me. Like, did Argentinosaurus live for 300 years? Is there any way we can know that, or were they like a 6 month?
Amir said they lived for 40 years.
40 years. That's not that great of a run, really.
What
was the average dinosaur lifespan?
Yeah. I don't know.
Like relative to other dinosaurs, was that?
Yeah, it's true. It could have been great relative to other dinosaurs.
I like this question. What does the vantage point look like from so high?
Yes.
Like the Saurus eye view.
Looking at world from Saurus eye view.
You could do that with a drone. Yeah.
You could. First off, I think that the chat is too good, because somebody just pointed out that it probably never saw its feet. It may have never seen its back feet, depending on how its neck muscles were. Like, it may not have been able to look back and see its own feet.
Right.
There's something beautiful about that there's parts of itself that it couldn't see, in addition to us not being able to see any parts of it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a scale.
Good God.
So
it wouldn't even notice if it stepped on us.
So
I have to think, so my way into this is going to be that I have to think that part of when I was a kid, one of my very few memories of being a very small kid was being aware of the fact that, one, there were a lot of terrible things in the world that adults were apparently afraid of because they wouldn't talk to me about them, and two, that I was very, very small and they were very, very big, and like they were powerful and I was weak, and I was conscious of that, and the good ones tried to insulate me from awareness of that, and the bad ones made me extra conscious of it. That was sort of my whole That was the way I imagined adults, like on a spectrum from they don't point out that I am weak and powerless before them to they make me very aware of it.
Mm.
So if I'm approaching this, I think I'm approaching it through the lens of why did I love dinosaurs when I was a kid? And why is the Argentinosaurus still like have the ability to take my breath away? And I think it's because their fibulas, I learned the name of the bone, were bigger than I am, bigger than an adult, and because they feel so otherworldly to me, like just their size and their scope, the fact that they didn't have neck muscles strong enough to look down and see their own feet, the fact that we don't know how their musculature worked at all to support a neck of that length. It all feels sort of like otherworldly to me. All feels like a fantasy universe that's similar to the one that I inhabited, or like that I liked to inhabit when I felt like safe and happy when I was a kid. And then I think the turn in the review is when that comes crashing up against the reality that there is a bigger animal in the world today.
Yes, I was going to say it needs to come back to the blue whale.
It has to come back to the blue whale. Yes. And so you think it's about how there were these historically powerful animals that were so big that we can barely imagine them, that we don't understand how this worked or how that worked, or how did they have the calcium to make this much bone. And then it has to come to the fact that it is here with us.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like, sometimes you look around, you like look for these things, whether in outer space or in our imaginations, or, you know, in the prehistoric era of these, you know, just this feeling that we have to look elsewhere to find wonder, and to find things to marvel at. And what your book does, and what the Argentinosaurus does, and what the blue whale does, is remind us that it's, you know, there are things to marvel at everywhere around us. I was looking at trees the other day, and I was like, how do trees stand up? Like massive, like these I mean, you know, I was looking at this tree that must have been like 100 feet tall. I was like I get it, like its roots are deep in the soil, like I understand, but like its trunk is not that thick, and it just is like, I don't know. There's so much.
I remember right at the beginning of the pandemic.
Oh my God, this is still going
a
on.
Mentor who I write about in Harvey, and they were telling me that they were like walking outside, and you know they're in their late 70s now, and they were like, I guess I knew in the abstract that this happens, but the leaves come out of the trees.
Truly. I mean, like,
the leaves emerge from the end of the branches, and they become leaves.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
So,
I take terrible care of my houseplants, and then they'll like look like they're on the verge of death. I was like, oh well, my plants have all died, and then I water them at night, and then the next morning I show up, and they're like, I was like, this is unbelievable. It's unbelievable. There's so many, just a little bit of water, and they're like, they're ready.
Yeah. Clint, I have the same problem.
Oh my gosh, we have
a little tree in our bedroom that it's so sad looking, but it's still alive.
It's been for almost our whole marriage, and now like it's a metaphor. It's not even about the tree anymore. It's about us.
Yeah.
And so, all right. So I think we found. First off, somebody should set up a Google Doc where everybody from tonight can go if they want and add thoughts about the Argentinosaurus. But I think we have a pretty good way into this, which is that we start out by thinking about why as a child did I love Argentinosaurus and other long-necked dinosaurs.
We also need to work in the review of your child. You know, like I think we need some. We need to know.
Yeah.
Well, as you know, I don't like to talk about children in any kind of specific way, because I feel like they don't have a choice. Like I feel like my kids like didn't necessarily sign up to be the subject of
I just want to
nonfiction
know
pieces.
why the original person who inspired.
No, it's true. He's the original. I mean, Jay is how old are your kids now?
11 and 7.
11 and 7. Mine are 4 and 2.
Yeah.
And just like my capacity for wonder I've always had. I mean, I kind of just look at things. I think that's why I became a poet, because I'm just like, I like the chance to like fixate on the most granular elements of something and be like, this is amazing. But my kids have truly expanded my capacity for wonder in like, and like ask me questions about things that like I moved through the world for 32 years being like, yeah, like wind. It just it blows, And they're like, why does the wind blow? And I'm like, well, like the ocean, it's like the ocean spit.
Tides,
It's like, right? But just like, so then we look up these, I mean, like we were watching video yesterday, they were like, syrup, it's delicious. Where does it come from? And it comes from trees. And they're like, why can we make syrup with the tree outside? And I was like, well, not that kind of tree. And they're like, why? I mean, just like,
Yeah.
It is always replenishing. Well, it is mostly replenishing. Sometimes it's like the essay you have where it's like, why?
Right.
And it just, to make you recognize, not take things in this world for granted when it's so easy to. It's like it's so easy to just walk by things or not even think about things and take for granted like how remarkable it is that like there is a plant in the corner of my office that when I give water to, it grows and like expands and like moves overnight. It's just, there's just so much of that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I think ultimately this is an exercise in trying to like flex that wonder muscle that kids are so naturally good at using, and that does sometimes atrophy, or at least atrophied for me as I got older, and that only now, only in the last few years have I really started to try to exercise again. And I think the Argentinosaurus is a good example of the fact that the wonders are never far away. It's our ability to pay a certain kind of attention that makes the difference. So I am very grateful to Jay for introducing us to the Argentinosaurus, and I have enjoyed learning a little bit about it. And then I think between this Google Doc and everyone in the chat, by the end of their work, they will have written an amazing Anthropocene reviewed episode about the Argentinosaurus.
I see what you're doing.
And then I'll steal it. No, I won't steal it. But I do want to. I just want to end by saying first to Clint, thank you for joining us tonight. To everyone in chat who named calf bones and everything else, thank you very much. It's been such a pleasure to be with you, and I feel it's a strange thing to try to launch a book into a world in this time, and the support that I've had over the last few weeks has meant a lot to me, so thank you. And a huge thanks again to the bookstores hosting us and to the Wilbur Theater. Next year, may we all be together. And indeed, next year, may I have written another book. That seems unrealistic. 3 years from now, may we all be together.
Clint will write something.
Yeah. We'll go to Clint's event in Boston. But yeah, it's great to be with y'all, and I just feel so lucky and grateful that this book is coming into the world with kind and generous readers behind it. So thanks.
And you all have everybody who's here has already bought the book, but. Yeah. Buy several more, buy them for your family, buy them for your friends. This is a perfect Father's Day gift. Father's Day is coming up for the father in your life to bring what better than to sit with your father on Zoom or in person and to marvel at our collective capacity for wonder with John Green. And so everybody, please buy this book, buy several of them, buy them for everybody you know from your local bookstores. I went into a bookstore for the first time in 14 months yesterday, and it was amazing.
Oh,
So like,
how was
I
it?
just was like browsing, and I was like touching. I was just like, oh man, you forget the how you discover the sorts of books that you don't through like the algorithm, right?
Yeah.
Like you see
It's
something
funny
on
you should
Google.
mention that because one of the booksellers who's hosting this event tonight started out at the bookseller in Chicago, which was my like hometown neighborhood bookstore when I lived in Chicago. And he recommended to me this. We were just reminiscing about this before the show started. He recommended to me this book that is a great example of a book that I loved that I never would have read in 7 lifetimes if it hadn't been recommended to me by like a bookseller who was clearly like cooler and better read than me. So there is just something wonderful about being in a bookstore and getting to learn from people who read a lot and. So I hope that experience is in front of all of us soon. But in the meantime, I'm just really, really grateful to y'all for being here.
Shout out to the We're Here Because crew. I hear y'all sing. I can hear the song.
Oh yeah, they're doing it. They're doing that thing. Doing it. Very beautiful. Thank y'all.
Lovely.
Clint, thank you
Good to
again.
see
Thanks
you,
to everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Yeah, take care. Bye,
Bye.
everybody.
Oh, Maggie, how long have you been watching nothing? Love you. Do you want to say hi to Will?
Sup?